The morning sun shimmered over the little village of Cana, where laughter filled the air and joy danced like music on the breeze. It was a wedding day, a day full of color, singing, and smiles. But could one simple day hold a miracle that would change everything? Guests gathered in bright robes as children spun with ribbons. Mary watched Jesus seated among the guests, his eyes gentle and calm. The air was alive with cheer, yet, beyond the laughter, a quiet worry began to stir. Servants glanced toward the stone jars, whispering in low voices. The wine was almost gone. The music slowed. The dancing faltered for a moment, and Mary noticed the change. Jesus lifted his gaze, serene, thoughtful, as if he already knew what was coming. The joy of the day trembled on the edge of something greater. Laughter faded to murmurs. The servants gathered near the stone jars, whispering anxiously. "The wine is gone," one said softly. Nathan's hands trembled as he lifted an empty jug. Around them, the music stuttered, uncertain. The bride and groom smiled nervously, unaware of what to do. Mary noticed the unease ripple through the crowd. Her eyes met Jesus, calm, knowing, filled with quiet strength. He did not move yet, but there was something in his gaze that gave her peace. Nathan looked from one servant to another, helpless. "What will we do?" he whispered. The joy of the wedding was fading like a candle in the wind, and only one light remained. The calm presence of Jesus, steady amid the worry. Mary stepped closer to Jesus. Her voice was gentle, full of faith. "They have no more wine." Jesus looked at her with deep affection. The sounds of the courtyard faded. Even the breeze seemed to still. Though his words were quiet, they carried strength. "My time has not yet come," he said, yet in his tone there was compassion, a whisper of what was to come. Mary's heart filled with trust. She didn't argue. She simply turned her gaze toward the servants, her eyes full of hope. For a long moment, Jesus said nothing. His eyes shone with kindness as he watched his mother's faith. Around them, the wedding guests began to stir again, unaware of the miracle soon to unfold. Jesus' voice was calm, steady, full of promise. The silence of heaven seemed to settle in that courtyard. Mary turned to the servants, her voice filled with unshakable faith. "Do whatever he tells you." Nathan stared at her, uncertain but curious. The moment hung in the air. Simple words, yet they carried the power of trust. Around them, light seemed to grow warmer. Hope flickered again in the servants' hearts. Something extraordinary was about to begin. The courtyard grew quiet again. The laughter had faded, replaced by soft whispers and worried glances. Nathan and the other servants stood beside 6 large stone jars, their hands resting on the cool stone. Each jar was empty. Nathan sighed, brushing the dust from his tunic. "There's nothing left," he murmured. But as he looked up, he saw Jesus approaching slowly. His steps were calm, his eyes gentle and full of purpose. The servants watched in silence, unsure what he would do. The air felt charged with something unseen, something holy. Nathan swallowed hard. "Fill these jars with water," Jesus said quietly. The servants glanced at each other. Water? For a feast that needed wine? But something in his voice made them move without hesitation. They lifted heavy buckets and began to pour. Water splashed and shimmered as it filled the first jar, then the second. Nathan worked quickly, curiosity and wonder growing inside him. What could possibly come of this? The sound of water echoed across the courtyard. Steady, rhythmic, peaceful. The last jar filled to the very brim. Nathan wiped his brow and looked toward Jesus. "They're full," he said softly. Jesus nodded. "Now," he said gently, "draw some out and take it to the master of the feast." The servants froze. Their eyes widened. "Take water to the feast, master." Nathan hesitated. His heart pounded, yet something inside him, a quiet voice, told him to trust. Nathan dipped the ladle into the jar. The water swirled, glinting like glass. His hands shook slightly as he lifted it. The moment felt heavy with wonder. The world seemed to hold its breath. "Go," Jesus said quietly. Nathan turned, holding the cup tightly. Each step toward the feast master felt like walking on the edge of a miracle. The servants gathered, breathless, as Nathan stood before the master of the feast. He held the cup high. For a heartbeat, all was still. The master took it, lifted it to his lips, and tasted. His eyes widened in amazement. The water was no longer water. It was wine. Rich, deep, full of sweetness and life. Nathan gasped, eyes shining with awe. Jesus' quiet miracle had turned emptiness into joy. Time seemed to freeze. The master of the feast lowered his cup slowly, his eyes filled with wonder. Around him the guests watched, waiting for his words. This is the best wine I have ever tasted," he exclaimed. His voice filled with amazement. Laughter broke out across the courtyard once more. Nathan stood in stunned silence, his heart pounding. He glanced back at the jars. The same jars he had filled with plain water. Now deep red wine shimmered inside them, glowing in the light like rubies. Jesus stood quietly nearby, peace radiating from his gentle smile. Nathan hurried to the jars, disbelief written across his face. He leaned in, staring at the liquid that shimmered like jewels. He dipped a small cup and tasted it. His eyes widened. It was true. The water had become wine. He looked toward Jesus, overwhelmed. Joy filled his heart like sunlight breaking through clouds. "It's a miracle," he whispered. Guests began to taste the new wine, laughter bursting forth again like music. The musicians struck their drums, the children danced, and joy spread through the courtyard. The bride and groom looked at each other in wonder, their hearts overflowing with gratitude. What had been a moment of worry was now a river of happiness. And Jesus, quiet, humble, watched with gentle satisfaction, his eyes filled with love. Nathan turned to Jesus, eyes full of awe. "How did you do this?" he asked softly. Jesus smiled, a smile that held more meaning than words. "Sometimes," he said, "when we trust, God fills the empty places with his best gifts." Nathan's heart lifted. He felt something new stirring inside, faith. The kind that believes even before it sees. The music rose higher, laughter filled the sky, and the courtyard overflowed with joy. The miracle had changed more than water. It had changed hearts. Mary watched her son quietly, her eyes shimmering with tears of love and pride. Jesus turned, his gaze meeting hers for a moment. Then he looked to the heavens, and the sunlight glowed brighter, as if heaven itself was smiling. The master of the feast hurried to the groom, still holding the cup of new wine. His voice rang out over the music. "Most people serve the best wine first," he laughed joyfully. "But you have saved the best for last." The guests cheered, raising their cups high. Eli and Mara looked at one another, tears of happiness in their eyes. What had once been worry was now overflowing celebration. Nathan watched, heart full, unable to stop smiling. The miracle had restored not only the wine, it had restored joy. Music filled the air again. Tambourines, flutes, and laughter rising together like a song of praise. The courtyard burst to life. Children danced with ribbons, and guests toasted joyfully. Nathan spun around with excitement, unable to contain his happiness. He had seen a miracle with his own eyes. Across the courtyard, Jesus smiled as if sharing in their joy, quietly, humbly. His presence brought peace that lingered beyond the noise. The bride and groom approached Jesus, their hearts overflowing with gratitude. "We don't know how to thank you," the groom said softly. Jesus smiled kindly. "Be joyful," he said, "for joy is a gift from God." The bride's eyes filled with tears as she whispered, "You saved our day." Jesus nodded gently. "And God saves much more than days, he saves hearts." Mary watched her son, her heart full of quiet joy. She knew this was only the beginning, a glimpse of the love he would bring to the world. As laughter echoed around her, she whispered a small prayer of thanks. Jesus' miracle had turned ordinary water into something extraordinary, just like he could turn an ordinary heart into one full of faith. As the sun began to set, the courtyard shimmered in warm colors: gold, rose, and soft amber. The people of Cana laughed, sang, and celebrated beneath the glowing sky. Nathan looked once more at Jesus. Their eyes met, and Nathan smiled. He didn't need to ask how it happened. He just knew. Where Jesus was, joy followed. The feast went on into the night, filled with laughter, dancing, and peace that could only come from heaven. When the laughter began to fade and the stars shimmered above Cana, Nathan stepped away from the crowd. The night air was cool, carrying the soft sound of flutes from a distance. He stood near the jars, now empty once more, and remembered how they had glowed with rich red wine. His heart was still racing with wonder. How could plain water become something so perfect? He touched the rim of a jar and smiled. Something had changed inside him too. Nathan turned and saw Jesus standing nearby, watching quietly. For a moment, neither spoke. The night breeze stirred their robes. Then Jesus said gently, "When you fill what is empty, even with something simple, God can turn it into his best gift." Nathan listened, his eyes wide. "I only poured water," he whispered. Jesus smiled. "Yes," he said softly, "and God did the rest." Nathan looked down, thinking deeply. He had seen something greater than a miracle. He had seen kindness, power, and love all in one moment. "Who are you really?" he asked quietly. Jesus didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked up at the stars and said, "One day you'll understand. But for now, remember, God's joy begins when you believe." Nathan nodded slowly, the truth sinking into his heart like light into water. Mary approached quietly, her smile gentle. "You saw what faith can do," she said. Nathan nodded. "I did. I'll never forget it." Mary placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then carry that faith with you," she said softly. "For even small acts of trust can invite great miracles." Nathan's heart felt light. He realized this day was not just a wedding. It was the beginning of something far greater. As the night deepened, Nathan looked once more at the quiet courtyard. He could still hear faint laughter and see the glow of lanterns reflecting off the wine jars. He whispered a prayer, not asking for anything, but simply thanking God for letting him witness his power. Above him, the stars shone brighter, as if heaven was listening. He smiled, his heart full. The miracle of Cana would never leave him. It had planted faith deep within his soul. As dawn began to warm the horizon, the last lanterns flickered low in Cana. The celebration had ended, but a quiet wonder lingered in every heart. The disciples gathered near Jesus, speaking softly among themselves. "We saw it," one whispered. "The water truly became wine." Another nodded, still in awe. Jesus said nothing, only smiled as golden light touched his face. The miracle had spoken for him. It was a sign, not of power to amaze, but of love to transform. Peter stepped closer, his eyes searching Jesus' calm expression. "Teacher," he said softly, "we believed before, but now we know." Jesus turned to him with a gentle smile. Faith begins in small places, he replied, and grows when you see God's hand at work. The disciples fell silent, hearts stirred by his words. Around them, the first birds began to sing, welcoming a new day. Nathan approached quietly, unsure if he should speak. Jesus looked at him and smiled, inviting him closer. "You believed," Jesus said gently. "Yes," Nathan whispered, "and I want to believe more." Jesus placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then let your heart stay open, and you will see many wonders. Not just with your eyes, but with your faith." Nathan nodded, feeling peace fill his soul. The disciples watched as the sunlight touched the jars. The same jars that had once held water, now forever remembered for a miracle. "He changes everything he touches," one of them murmured. Jesus turned toward the rising sun, the light reflecting in his eyes. "The glory of God," he said quietly, "is not hidden to those who have hearts to see." And in that moment, their faith deepened, rooted in quiet wonder. The morning breeze carried the scent of wine and olive blossoms through Cana. Mary stepped beside Jesus, her eyes gentle and proud. "They saw your glory," she said softly. Jesus nodded. "And one day, the whole world will." Together, they looked toward the path leading out of the village. The first miracle was complete, but it was only the beginning. The journey of faith had just begun. The next morning, the village of Cana shimmered with light. The wedding guests were gone, but laughter still echoed faintly in the streets. Children ran between the olive trees, chasing ribbons left from the celebration. Nathan watched them play and smiled. He felt different now, lighter, happier, full of peace. He looked at the sky, remembering the words of Jesus. The miracle was over. Yet the joy remained, blooming quietly in every heart. Mary and Jesus walked quietly through the village paths. The air was cool and fresh. Birds sang above, and the world seemed brighter. "You brought joy where there was none," Mary said softly. Jesus smiled, his eyes full of kindness. "Joy belongs to all who believe," he replied. "Even when life feels empty, God can fill it again." His voice was calm, like the sound of a gentle stream. They stopped at a small well outside the village. Jesus dipped his hand into the cool water and let it run through his fingers. "Water," he said quietly, "seems simple, but it carries life, just like faith. Small, but powerful when placed in God's hands." Mary watched him, her eyes filled with awe and love. She understood now, this was only the beginning of the wonders he would do. Nathan joined them, carrying a small jar from the wedding. "I wanted to keep this," he said shyly. Jesus smiled. "Keep it not for what it held," he said, "but for what it means." Nathan nodded, holding the jar close. It wasn't just clay. It was a reminder that with Jesus, even the simplest things could become signs of God's love. As the sun rose higher, light spread across the hills of Cana. The laughter of children carried through the air. Jesus looked toward the horizon, his face peaceful and full of purpose. "Joy," he said softly, "is the gift that never runs out." The wind moved gently through the olive leaves, like heaven whispering, "Amen." And as they walked on, the world felt new. Because where Jesus walked, joy was always near.